co-founded the largest student-run business in the country. Grew that for a while until we had 15 different divisions. That was a lot of fun. After business school, I went to work for a real company with real budgets and real millions of dollars in the bank to fund the whole thing, and learned a whole bunch about what worked and what didn't work in growing a business. And ever since then, since '86, I've been out on my own. I've started more than a dozen companies, most of which have failed. Mostly I have bootstrapped, but I've also raised venture capital money. I built a book packaging company that we ran for more than a dozen years. It did over 100 books. And then I started an internet company, which I was fortunate enough to sell to Yahoo with really good timing. And since 2000-ish, I've been out on my own, both starting projects and writing books and blogging.
All right, so we definitely have the right guy here. So this month's issue, Seth, as I mentioned to you, is focused on the bootstrap entrepreneur. So the bootstrap startup seems to be holding a spotlight a little bit more in recent memory than in the past. Talk about why you think people are paying closer attention to them now. What's changed in your view?
Well, let's be really clear. Bootstrapping is, of course, impossible because it's based on lifting yourself up by your bootstraps. And gravity isn't just a good idea, it's the law. And so, of course, it's impossible to bootstrap yourself, but it turns out it's not. And there are the occasional exceptional stories of people like Jeff Bezos at Amazon who should not have bootstrapped his company. It doesn't lend itself to that. But most of the businesses that we're talking about here are organized around a very simple idea, which is that given all of the tools in our environment now, all of the things that you can buy off the shelf or get for free that let you bring your idea to the world, it is easier than ever to start the right business with no money. But the key phrase there is the right business. You cannot bootstrap a construction company. You cannot bootstrap a giant website that sells hundreds of millions of dollars worth of books and CDs to the general public. Those businesses require huge investments in capital that build you an asset that makes you unassailable. That's not the kind of business we're talking about today. We're talking about a business that can certainly grow bigger than just you, the person who runs it. But at the beginning, it has a key dynamic. And that dynamic is that other people are willing to pay you money for what you make before you need to put money into the business.
Let's address the cost issue here for just a second, because the world has changed dramatically the last 5, even 10 years. In the 20th century, the common thought was that you need to raise millions of dollars to get your idea out to the world to make it successful. Obviously, you and I know that that's not true anymore. So debunk this myth for us. Why don't we need big bucks to start a business today in particular?
Well, simple example, when I started Yoyodyne, we invented ethical online direct mail, email marketing. And it cost me more than $2 million to build the email engine that we use to run that company. And today, MailChimp will give you that same tool or something close to it for $19. That's a huge difference. It used to be that you needed a team of engineers to build a nice-looking website. Now you don't. It used to be that all of the tools that big companies used were hidden away from the public. But today, all of those tools are on the web. And so they have access to exactly the same tools that you do. And most of those tools, because they're digital, are available for a fraction of what they used to cost.
So talk more about these tools, Seth. Point out a half dozen or so of these key tools that are available today that hadn't been available 5, 10 years ago. I mean, there's some amazing things out there to help people get started on their idea or business without getting venture capital money. Talk about tools like Kickstarter and any other tools that people ought to at least pay attention to, look into as they start their new venture.
Sure. Well, I'm going to talk first about executional tools. Collecting money by a credit card is trivial once you have a PayPal account. Getting fulfillment done is really cheap once you Google online and find all the places that will do fulfillment for you really cheap. Finding freelance programmers, people who will work for you in their spare time, all the way down to the kinds of thing TaskRabbit does in offering you people who will be a gopher for you. When I started out, I didn't have enough money to afford a laser printer, and I used to have to go down the street at $1 a page just to print each page of the documents I was working on. All that stuff, all that outsourceability is right there just waiting for you if you know how to click and evaluate your options. Then there's the second category of things, which are there ways to get your fans, your customers, the people who believe in you, to help fund the work you want to do? And Kickstarter, and far easier to use, Indiegogo, are both platforms that make it easy for you to describe your project and ask people to put up money. Now, you should not be counting on people putting up money because they're nice or putting up money because they want to help you out. In fact, both of those sites work best when the people who are putting up money get something for their money. So you describe to them the thing you're going to make. I just bought a 8-sided cast iron skillet for $70 or so on Kickstarter. Now, the guy who described it didn't make any skillets before he sold thousands of them. And after he had sold almost $1 million worth of skillets, he had the money, and then he could go make them. That's classic bootstrapping. Classic bootstrapping is customers care more about what you're going to make than the money you need to make it. So they are willing to give you the money so you could go make that thing that they want to buy. The thing that people don't understand about this method of funding is you cannot use it on strangers. That you can't just show up on these things and then go hassle a bunch of bloggers and other websites and say, please promote me, please promote me. It doesn't work that way. The reliable, proven way to do this is you earn the right. You lead the tribe, you connect the tribe, and then, and only then, do you ask the tribe if they want to support what you're doing.
Some great ideas there. I like find something that a few people really want and care about really deeply, and it lends itself to bootstrapping. Now, going to the execution tools that you pointed out, Seth, I'd love to have you just pass some suggestions here too, because I think a lot of people, they hear the tools, but then have to go through the costly mistakes in using these tools before they learn how to use them properly. So using things like, say, TaskRabbit or Elance, where you're outsourcing to other people that you might not ever meet physically, what are some suggestions for entrepreneurs to pay attention to make sure that you utilize those relationships to their maximum potential and that you cover any potential downsides to working with outsourced talent and labor?
Okay, the first thing I would say is I really hope you make a lot of mistakes. I think that making a lot of mistakes in this process is essential, that it's not something you can learn from, I wrote an ebook people can read for free called The Bootstrapper's Bible. The Bootstrapper's Bible gets you started. An interview like this gets you started, but no one's going to be able to tell you the answers. And you should not quit your job and borrow every penny you can and start expecting to figure it out as you go. You have to figure it out long before you start, by practicing, by doing small projects. That the way TaskRabbit and Elance work is if you can describe precisely what you want, then hordes of people who are looking for small projects can say, yeah, I'll do that for you. The hard part is describing precisely what you want. So if you go to Elance, where many people go to get their software developed or their website developed, you see really cheesy, not very well written, short descriptions of, I want my website to do this. And you put it up there and someone bids $200 to do it for you. Well, they're going to do their version of what you wrote because what you wrote wasn't precise enough for every intelligent person to look at and say, yes, I know exactly what you mean. And the other half of that is that we forget that the people who are doing this work are people. And people have different skills and communicate differently. So the biggest piece of advice I can give you is this. Do tiny little projects, lots of them, until you find someone who understands you and until you find someone who you trust, and then keep working with the same person. The thing that's so essential to remember here, Darren, is your business is not a factory. It is the work of human beings. And if you want to build something that I will pay for, that I will choose to buy instead of the thing I already have access to, it has to be extraordinary. And the only way it will be extraordinary is if it is built by people who have a vision on how to make it better than average.
That's great. All right, I want to back up to something you said there and delve into it for just a second. You said, know that you will make a lot of mistakes. Allow yourself, pursue the fact that you're going to make lots of mistakes. One of the biggest obstacles faced by entrepreneurs is fear. The thought usually goes something like, well, what if I invest all my money and all my time and this doesn't work? So I'm curious how you would respond to an entrepreneur who presented you with this as their greatest barrier to getting started.
Yeah, don't invest all your time and don't invest all your money. It's pretty simple. There is no effective dummies guide here. If you are looking for a job where you get to pretend you're in charge, you should open a sandwich franchise where they tell you step by step how to put the mayonnaise on the roll. That's not what you're signing up for. You're signing up for an exploration. And the same way you wouldn't quit your job to start a rock and roll band and then start taking guitar lessons, you probably shouldn't invest all your time and money before you've done all of these tasks on your own or for someone else. That we know lots of tricks of the trade in what we are good at. So before you leap into that thing you're not good at, the more time you spend actually doing these things, having a blog just for your fun, having an email newsletter just for your family, figuring out how to process images, design logos, work with editors, work with writers, work with people who do design. You can do that stuff before you invest all your time and all your money.
So another danger that I want to point out, just to be sure that we're covering both sides of the argument, we're talking about bootstrapping your entrepreneurial endeavor, but explain the pitfalls when a person doesn't seek outside funding for their business and starts on a shoestring budget. Just to, we're covering both sides. When do you suggest somebody go and seek outside funding, and when is it a mistake not to do so?
All right, well, let's talk briefly about the biggest benefit of outside funding. You can buy an asset. That asset could be a machine, a fancy domain name, a lease on a perfect location. It might be the ability to hire great agencies and others who work for cash only. These are assets that can be purchased. And what we see is if you know how to put those assets to work for you, raising money from the outside makes perfect sense. But you must remember that professional investors, not amateurs like your aunt, but professional investors, are doing it for only one reason, because they want to get out of the investment and get their money back times 10. That's what they want. So the minute you raise outside money, you have already sold your company. It just hasn't happened yet, but it will happen as soon as the investor can make it happen, because that's why she invested. And it's a mistake to build a lifestyle company, to build a company where you want to work for the rest of your life, where you are not hell-bent on building something to scale and to sell and raise money from a professional. Now, on a bootstrapping level, here is the giant mistake. It's a mistake I made, and it's one I repeat over and over again because people still don't get it. There is a difference between a freelancer and an entrepreneur. Freelancers get paid when they work. You get paid by the hour. Entrepreneurs make money when they sleep. Entrepreneurs build something bigger than themselves. You cannot easily do both at the same time. And the reason is, if you try to do both, the entrepreneur who's so worried about saving money will always hire the cheapest freelancer in the room, and that is you. And so you will keep hiring yourself to do all the work, which will keep you too busy to work on the business as opposed to working in the business. And when you get caught in that trap, you start running out of money, which means you hire yourself even more, and then you burn out. I've been there. It's no fun.
So while we're talking about the allocation of some of this funding, because I do agree that we could start sacrificing our own life and time to do things on the cheap. If you were to take the money that you've got, either whether you are self-investing it and trying to bootstrap it or you are taking outside funding, how would you prioritize the allocation of resources? What are some things that you can do in a low-cost way, and what are some things where you don't want to shortcut?
Well, let me quote Steve Blank here a little bit. The most important thing that every startup does is not try to solve a new problem or not try to find a market. It is a quest for customers. If you find customers, everything else will take care of itself. So we start by finding customers and then making something that they will buy, not making something and then going looking for customers to buy it. So I would spend 99% of my time and 99% of my money finding customers. Because if you find customers and make them happy, everything else will take care of itself.
So as we start to wind down, Seth, of all the things that we've talked about when starting with little to nothing to get our business going. Based on your experience, give us a couple of need-to-know pieces of advice, things that could make the difference between success and failure of our shoestring venture.
I would say that the first thing you need to do is figure out which human beings in your life are going to actually help you with moral support and encouragement, and which people in your life you shouldn't talk to. Because you're not going to be able to persuade the skeptical until after you succeed, so don't even try. Number two is, I would say, that the idea of picking yourself, of saying, I made this, is really difficult. And spending some time doing it in the small is really important. I spend a fair amount of time talking to musicians, and it's fascinating to see how many are waiting to hear from A&M Records, how many want Motown to call them on the phone. It doesn't take anything today to record your own music and put it on iTunes. It's trivially easy, but they have a mental block about picking themselves. They want the external authority to say, you, I picked you. And what happens when you talk to people like my friend Amanda Palmer, who have picked themselves, is they have no intention of ever going back. It's the best thing they ever did. So if you can pick yourself for free, if you can pick yourself without quitting your day job, go ahead and do it. Because it's the action of doing that that will undo so much of the anxiety you have about starting.
Seth, since you've helped so many people with their entrepreneur efforts and worked with so many in the development of their new ideas, share a couple of stories, success or failures of entrepreneurs who started their business with not much to speak of, as a way of encouraging those that are listening through these stories and examples that it's possible for them too.
You know, I was walking down 6th Avenue in New York City about 5 years ago with one of my kids, and I realized that I had been on a sales call in every building on both sides of the street for 9 blocks in a row. And I had been rejected from almost every single one of them. I got 900 rejection letters in a row the first year I was in the book business. And after I started Yo-Yo-Dine, probably the most vivid story is when I finally got a meeting with Levi Strauss to sell them $1 million ad campaign. And I flew out to San Francisco just to see them. And there was a guy in the office waiting when I was waiting. And the person we were supposed to meet with came out, and he looked at the other guy and had decided he didn't want to meet with him. So he pretended that they had never had a meeting scheduled. And he turned to me and said, you can come on in. So I already knew I was in trouble. And I go into the guy's office, and we were within 3 days of being out of business. We were within 3 days of being out of money. And I pull up my laptop and I start talking him through our PowerPoint deck. And I'm not making this up, Darren. The laptop bursts into flames and smoke starts coming out of the laptop. Well, I was in the middle of switching from one laptop to another that week. So without missing a beat, I closed the laptop, put it in the garbage can, and took out my backup laptop from my backpack and continued the presentation. And I thought my style and flair would be enough to get me the gig, and it did not. We then had to send a car service to MasterCard, who owed us some money, because if we had waited one more day for them to FedEx the check, we would have gone out of business. And only because our sales rep was able to get in the car and go pick up the check one day earlier were we able to make it to payroll. And the last story, which has quite a funny ending, is this. I got a call a few years into it from a guy named Bill Gross, who's a very well-known entrepreneur. And Bill said, I need to buy horoscope.com. I know you own it. And in fact, I did own it, and that's a whole other story about why. And I needed the money to make payroll. Well, I owned it personally, but the company needed the money. So I pretended that the company owned the domain instead of me, and I let him buy the domain from the company. And he paid us $25,000 for it, which today would be worth 50 times that. And he said, and I want to give you stock options too. I said, I don't believe in stock options. I don't want any stock options. And unbeknownst to me, he gave us stock options anyway. Well, a couple years later, after Yahoo had bought our company, the general counsel of the company comes to my office with a piece of paper in his hand. And he says, do you know anything about this? And you never want the general counsel of a big company to come into your office. And I'm a little nervous, and I see what it is. It turned out that the stock options I didn't even know we had were worth $450,000. But because it wasn't my domain, it was the company's domain, the check went to Yahoo instead. So Yahoo, who needed the money like a hole in the head, got this check for $500,000 because I needed to make payroll 3 years earlier.
Wow. That is a story. So Seth, you have a lot of customers here at Success and across the Success audience. We're curious, before we end this interview, what are you working on now? What are you passionate about? What should we be paying attention to of the great works that you are constantly putting out in the world? Talk to us about what's next for you.
I've really adopted this mindset of trying to put as much useful content in the world as possible, and I have no interest anymore in going out and promoting it. That's why the Kickstarter project I did over a year ago is the last book I've been working on, because it's just too hard to go in the world and get people to go buy a book. I did a Skillshare course for entrepreneurs last month. It's been really, really successful. I think it's the most successful course they've ever done. It costs about $15. And I've got some other courses I'm putting work into. But the primary driver for me is, can I open doors and turn on lights for people? And if I can do that, it really doesn't matter to me one bit whether it's free or not free. What matters is, can people take this candle and use it to light something for themselves? That's my vision. That's my goal.
Wonderful. Well, before we do let you go, if people listening are inspired and encouraged and enlightened, as I'm sure they are after listening to you and to this interview, if there's one thing that they could put on a Post-it note right now to remember as they're going through the early stages of building and growing and trying to make a success of their bootstrap venture, what would you have them write on that post?